Welcome to Life-Changing Challengers, the podcast where passion meets purpose. I'm Brad Minus, your host, guiding you through stories of transformation and triumph, from endurance feats to overcoming adversity. Our guests defy the limits and inspire action. Ready to ignite your desire and incinerate your barriers? Join us. Your journey to the extraordinary begins now. And welcome back to another episode of Life-Changing Challengers. I'm really excited, guys. I have Tullie Bailey with me today. He's an author. He's a musician. He is an entrepreneur. And actually, he calls himself a hustler. And we're going to be talking about that since he's now has released his book, Unleashing the Hustle Within, Advice for Positive and Productive Life. So, Tullie, how you doing?
Doing well.
I'm doing great, and I appreciate you being here with us. So can you tell us a little bit about your childhood, maybe where you grew up? What was the complement of your family? And what was it like to be Tullie as a kid?
Yeah, so my childhood, I'm originally from Grand Junction, Colorado. I am the youngest of 5 children, and my childhood got a little crazy pretty young. My father had ran an oil and gas business, and that kind of fizzled out in the 80s, and he kind of lost his way and got addicted to drugs and got in some trouble. Ended up taking my mom hostage. Through that situation, he was apprehended, shot while apprehended, went to jail, and ended up passing away, leaving my mom as a single parent with 5 kids at 23.
Oh my God.
Where the saga begins, right? So, we were very, very poor and had to become resourceful very quickly. Me being the youngest of everybody, I just kind of learned as I went, I guess.
Youngest of 5 kids. Did you have like regular dinners with the whole family? Did you sit around a table?
In those early years, yeah. And I look back on that really fondly, right? Because we had to move as a tight unit because there was so many of us. And then it was just my mom. Like her family really didn't help out. So like when we would go grocery shopping, I remember we would walk a couple miles to the nearest grocery store. We would do the month's worth of shopping. And then as we walked home from the grocery store, we would usually take a canal bank, which was kind of off the road. And each kid had to carry a couple bags to get all of the groceries home. It was sort of what we had to do at the time, right? Like we didn't have a vehicle. My mom was doing her best and she made it work. And through that, it created like a resourceful dynamic in each one of us, right? Like we all came to succeed in unique ways, and we've been able to succeed because of that.
Oh, that's amazing. A lot of people, they don't have that ability, today. Everything's so easy. You want food, they'll deliver it to you. You want your month's worth of groceries, they'll deliver it to you. Back then, and I'm a child of the 80s as well, 70s and 80s. Yeah, I mean, that was the way it was, is that you figured out a way to get there, and you had to get there. Whether you had a car, you had to walk, I had to ride a bike. And that was the only way that you could get places back then. So it's interesting that we can go at that dynamic. And what would these, with the children of today, when they don't even want to drive anymore, now I've got friends that have 18-year-olds that still don't have their license because they just don't want to.
Which is bizarre.
Oh, at 16, are you kidding? I made my parents get me my driver's test on my 16th birthday. That was the first day. I made it happen. All right. So you were in 3rd, 4th grade. You finally got a family car that your mom was driving you guys around. Were you involved in anything else? Were you allowed to be involved in anything else? Like, any kind of sports or martial arts or?
We kind of lived in a rougher area to sort of all that we could afford. Went to school, kind of tried to get involved with sports, but it never really hit. Plus, the neighborhood kids weren't really doing that either. And then eventually, my mom took a job at a factory. And so she kind of started working, 12 to 16-hour days. And my older siblings were looking after me, but they were kind of rambunctious and on their own thing. And, we were just sort of left to our own devices, right? Still all just trying to survive. It was around that time, like 4th, 5th grade, I started realizing that we were really poor, right? And that, shopping for your school clothes at the Goodwill wasn't the routine, and the kind of food that we were eating was probably more healthy than now. It was very limited and sparse. Sort of acknowledgement that we were actually poor and whatever, I started figuring out ways to get to hustle and generate revenue for myself. So I wanted to go play video games at the convenience store, or I wanted to have different shoes or whatever. And so, early on, like every kid back then, I would go find glass bottles and turn them in for the little bit of money. We would rebuild bicycles and sell them to other kids in the neighborhood, you know, and then eventually I kind of fell into some mischievous circles, and I started doing things that were probably, no, I know for sure weren't the right thing. I started stealing car stereos and actually hustling, through means in the neighborhood, selling weed, different stuff. And through that, I learned how to run a business, right? And I know we frown on it these days. Everybody's like, don't do that under any circumstance. And I don't encourage that kind of behavior, but I at least acknowledge what I took from it. And so during the time, I had a team. I organized them to go do certain things. We would take that revenue, reinvest in the company. And I did that for a number of years until I eventually got locked up when I was 16. And I went to like a juvenile boot camp and then was placed some other facilities until I was roughly 18 years old. And during that time, I had some siblings get in some serious trouble, and they ended up catching like real prison time. And I kind of told myself I would never go back to that life, right? But that was all I had known at that point, right? Like there wasn't any other opportunity. And so I came out and I was sort of lost, kind of searching for the next thing. And I ended up, through my older brother, stumbling into an oil and gas job.
Nice.
Oil field. And it was interesting to me because after done things illegally to acquire money, it's really hard to go work at McDonald's, right? Because it doesn't pay very much. And so discovering the oil and gas industry and understanding the freedom that offered someone like me was great for the time, right? Like this is 2001-ish. I was exposed to the ability to make, at that time, $70,000, $80,000 a year. And I was working 2 weeks and I was having 2 weeks off. So I would have 2 weeks to do whatever I wanted. And 2 weeks that I had to be on the rig. Through that process, I didn't really have a dad. And so a lot of my discipline and my work ethic sort of came from the oil and gas industry. It was its own kind of thing. Like it's not the military, but you're exposed to extremely difficult circumstances and you're forced to make it work, figure it out.
I could definitely see that. You said that discipline came from oil and gas, which I know it probably did. I was in the military and we were doing 16, 17-hour days of work. And so I get it. But I think you actually, just by listening to your story, I think you actually started gaining some discipline first by walking back and forth to the grocery store and picking up bags and having to pick up these bags and bring them back. I think that started it. Then knowing that you found ways, that you were searching and finding ways to make income when you were young, whether it was moral, lawful or not. I think you got some discipline there too, which just made your lessons on the rig just that much faster. But I need to step back just for a minute. I just want to know, when you were stealing car stereos, how fast did it take you to freaking Slim Jim that sucker? What was your fastest time? I know they all timed them.
More often than not, man, you would check for the cars that were unlocked. So at least, if you check 100 cars, you would find at least 5 that were unlocked, and that was the one you would hit.
Okay. All right. No problem. I was just curious. It's like a kind of fun question, right? It's way back in your past. It got nothing to do with today. And I was like, you probably kind of.
I try to work with people and help people that are coming from that landscape. But, I like when I had the opportunity to work with kids that come from a background like that, because I have answers for them. I can help. I know what that looks like.
100%. And way to flip the question to a positive, buddy. That's huge. That is great. So you're working on the rigs. How long did you end up doing stint in oil and gas?
I mean, I was in the oil and gas industry for about 15 years and worked pretty high in the ranks. But parallel to that, there was that constant question that I wanted to do something more. And so I started toiling with the idea of first DJing. Like I ended up buying a bunch of some turntables, some records. Through the process of DJing, I got really interested in rapping, MCing. I practiced, got good at rapping, and started making my own beats. Found a guy that could be my DJ. Kind of did it all myself. I approached the venue and I was like, look, I could probably get 100 people in this room if you give me a chance. And they did. Sure enough, I got 100 people into that place and I did a little show. I did some opening shows for bands like Digital Underground and the Loonies and different groups back then. And I just kind of, my 2 weeks, I would be on the rig doing oil rig stuff. And then for 2 weeks, I would be couch surfing, either working on booking tours or physically on the road touring. And it started locally. I'm from Colorado. And so fortunately, you know, you have the major markets, Denver, Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, Grand Junction. But then there's like 30 mountain towns, right? And during the summer or the winter, those mountain towns are usually hopping. So I was able to book tours in places like Durango, Gunnison, Crested Butte, Telluride, Aspen, Glenwood Springs, Rifle, Colorado, like all these places. And so I got really good at routing tours in my market. And, I started looking at the artists that were where I wanted to be and
Yeah.
I looked at who were opening up to those artists in that market, right? And I started reaching out to those artists, the openers, and I'll be like, hey guys, I could book a tour for you in the Colorado market if you could get me up in the Minnesota market, or you can get me in the Southern California market, or you could get me in the Arizona market. And so I started building this network with people because I had figured out how to book and route tours in my market. And I was able to tap into some other markets and play some other shows. And that turned into me first jumping on little micro tours with people. And then eventually I was booking and routing my own tour throughout the Southwest and then the West Coast and then throughout the US. And eventually over the span of 5 to 10 years, I was playing shows in Europe. I was playing shows all over the US and more or less on my own thing, right? The venues that I would play, every now and then I might open up for a bigger artist. But for the most part, I was playing dive bars. I was playing 50 to 300 person venues. And we just did it. I did it for a lot of years and had a lot of fun.
Man, that's amazing. So you basically made yourself a promoter for big. So you started with big names and actually then brought in the headliners. Now, when you say that you actually booked your own tours, are you talking about being a DJ or
MC and a group?
was an MC? Okay.
In that time, my rap name creatively, originally I formed a group and the group kind of dissolved after a year because they didn't want to do the work. And so I called myself Tullie the Rapper. And I used that name and I toured all over the place, man, playing shows in Phoenix and LA and Chicago, all these places. And, again, parallel to that, every 2 weeks I would be back on the rig, right? Like I would go and I would earn my money. I got to the point where the rap stuff was making me some money, the rig was making money, but the thing that I haven't really talked about yet, and I hadn't conquered at that point as a young man was drugs and alcohol, right?
Okay.
I used to sell drugs and I was around a lot of drugs and I personally never really partook in it. But as I was learning, as I'm on the rig and the rig tends to be a pretty wild place where there's a lot of drinking and there's some recreational drugs. And so I started indulging in some of those things. And then I'm on the road and I hadn't figured out, I felt like I had to be the life of the party. And I felt like in order to be the life of the party, I had to partake in what they were using to party. And so my life turned into this thing where I'm on the road getting wasted because I'm playing, 10 venues. And then I go back to the rig and these guys are going out to the bar every night. I felt like to uphold that camaraderie with my oil field buddies, I had to drink with them. And then when I'm touring and rapping, I felt like I had to be the light.
Yeah.
So my life turned into a really long party that never seemed to end. And, then I started dabbling with reading books and trying to figure it out, right? Towards if we're at a timeline, I would say maybe 2009-ish. I was starting to look to settle down and get out of being on the road as much and drinking and drugging as much. And so I was looking at either moving to LA to really pursue the music. And I ended up moving to meeting somebody in Denver, and we built a friendship and then a relationship. But really what was happening is I was planting roots, right? And those roots gave me the foundation I needed to like really take a look at my life and what I had going on. And I understand that I needed more balance.
That's a great story, and I commend you for being able to dish that life off. It doesn't sound like you were the victim of the environment, that maybe you weren't. Would you have considered yourself addicted to drugs and alcohol, or was it just the fact that it was always around that you ended up partaking?
There came a time where I did get addicted to drugs and alcohol, and it became a real problem that I actually had to traverse, but we'll get into that a little bit later.
All right. No, that's great. Hey, just by the way, it was released on November 12th, but you might need to listen to an episode with this guy. His name was Jeremy Hasselwood. And he started a rap group too, and moved and ended up in ATL and rapping out there. So listen to him. His stories are pretty close to what you're talking about, but he didn't promote himself. He was really just trying to make it as a rapper, and he was at the Apollo. He said he was one of the only white rappers to actually stand up and get a solo spot at the Apollo. So at the time, one of the first. He's a little bit older too. So anyway, check out that. And for anybody listening, go ahead and check out the episode with Jeremy Hasselwood, and I'll put it here. Yeah, but so the relationship that you ended up getting to, is this your current wife?
It is, yeah.
Well, fantastic. So that's been a while now. Look at you. You've been married like 15 years.
We got married, but first I met her. I still was doing some shows, but I was slowing down, and I was coming to realize that I was actually a promoter, and I needed to throw parties as well. And so then I'm like, I continued on the rig for a while, and I started more or less routing tours and just throwing pop-up shows with everybody from like underground artists to, back then it was Davey Bass that was big. I threw some tours for him. And we did that for a number of years. And then eventually, every time I was at the rig, I had this beautiful wife, and I had this sort of booming promotional thing I'm pursuing. And the rig I felt like I was on a different planet, right? Like it just didn't need my purpose anymore. And I came to a point where I just couldn't be there any longer, even though at the time I was probably making 150,000 a year, probably. And that was back in like 2012 or 13 or something. 2015. I left the rig in 2014. And I took a leap of faith and took a job at a bar that I had thrown events at before. But I stepped in. I think the first night I was there, I did coat check, right? Like I went from running a drilling crew and having all this, authority and making lots of money to like tipped minimum wage and surviving on tips essentially. But very quickly, my work ethic that probably started from carrying grocery bags back and forth back when I was really young to like my entrepreneurial hustling ambition all the way to the bar, I had this work ethic that was unseen, right? Like I was doing 4 jobs. I would do all the extra work. I would take trash, whatever needed done, I would do it. And so I moved up the ranks really quickly. I got to the point where I was a bar back. I never really had interest in bartending, even though I could. I preferred the bar back because you could kind of be everywhere. While I was bar backing, I started throwing parties, and I would get a percentage of the bar, piece of the door, plus I'm making tips, and I'm getting my thing, and it became a really lucrative thing for me. But I had never really, I come from, my dad had addiction, my siblings struggled through addiction, drugs and alcohol, and here I was in the belly of it, right? Like I had access to all the liquor, every drug dealer that came to the bar, and when I say bar, like it's a club, it held a couple thousand people. Oh, so wow. I'm throwing these big parties. Everybody knows who I am. I can drink as much as I want. I can do whatever drugs for free. And so like that same reoccurring problem popped up in my life, and I had never really slayed that demon. And I went a fair amount of time like entrenched in it. I started that in probably 2014. And it wasn't until 2020 that I made the decision to get sober. So there was a lot of years in there where really trying to drink everything at the bar and do all of the drugs. And it started wearing on me. And I started, at a point, probably 2018, I started looking for answers and getting back into some spiritual stuff and some growth stuff.
Yeah.
And I decided to take on therapy. And I would come to therapy hungover, whatever. And she was a great therapist and she helped work through the problem. And then eventually I had a really rough night, New Year's Eve, 2020. And
Before COVID.
I let a lot of people down, my team down. I let my wife down. And so I just quit doing drugs. I quit drinking alcohol and got sober. And, fast forward 3 months, we land in COVID. And for a lot of people, they struggle with it because they had all this time to themselves and so they could drink. But for me, one thing I always did is I kept my house separate, right? So I never drank at home. I never did drugs at home. I always try to be as much of a family man as I could be, being that I was doing this dual life thing. When COVID hit, it really gave me an opportunity to reinforce the kind of values I wanted to have for my family. And I had already made this pledge of sobriety to myself. And that time for me complemented my intentions. And I was able to really double down on gaining information about what it means to be sober and helping myself so that I could help others.
So before, when you were on the rig and then you were booking parties and doing your own music, it seemed like, yeah, it was this thing of you would go to the rig and after work you go to the bar. So a couple hours here at the bar, but most of the time you were working. And then at a party you kind of stay sober to get things going. And then you had 3-4 hours of being around the drugs and the alcohol, but then you go home. Whereas now you're working at the bar and you're holding parties and so now you're totally entrenched. It's all around you for 8-9 hours a day. I can see how that might be that might end up being a problem. But the fact that then that discipline stuck with you, one, to that you're like, no, I got to make a change. Got therapy. That was great. Then you realize that, all right, now it's time. You had that one situation. Now you said you went cold turkey. Did you do any kind of did you go to any meetings? Did you do any kind of step program? You just said, nope, I'm just done.
I didn't, man. I got sober and then I spent a lot of time with my family. I was rebuilding. It's COVID. So I'm rebuilding bicycles. I built a deck in my backyard. I'm making all in the back.
Yeah.
Crazy. And keep in mind, I had actually had to quit therapy because COVID hit and my financial situation had changed. I couldn't afford therapy. You couldn't really go see someone. For me, the video therapy thing didn't make sense. And so I'm driving them crazy and I get this idea I'd always wanted to drive for Lyft. Right. And so I would get the car that's going to work for the Lyft thing. And I start driving for Lyft and almost instantaneously found purpose in that. Right. It could be a thing where I'm just, I'm a guy about the town. I kind of know everybody. And so, trying to find the best restaurant, easy. Right. You want to know where to go hiking? Got you. Done. No problem. But then there was these instances where I would pick people up. I wrote about this in my first book about this girl that I picked up. It was a blizzard and we had her son with us and he was like maybe 18 months, something like that, smaller. And we had to take him to the aunt. So it ended up being like an hour and a half ride. So I got to know this young lady. I spent some time with her. And in that time, I came to learn that the child's father the child had never met the father. The mom's working 3 jobs, 18 hours a day, barely surviving. And she's kind of at her wit's end. And then she gets in my car and we start talking and she starts explaining to me that she's working at the cell phone store at the mall and she's working at this pipe store somewhere and she's doing the Amazon thing. And I start explaining to her about little entrepreneurial things I know about, whether it's Lyft and Grubhub or online remote work. By the end of the conversation, she's emotional, I'm emotional, and I was able to get her some information to get her the direction. And I felt that gift of helping somebody, right? That's what Lyft became for me. It became this tool where I could interact with people. I could help them find whatever restaurants or bars they're looking for, all the way down to if they're trying to become an entrepreneur, I could help them start their t-shirt company or whatever. And so back then was, and still to this day is, a tool that I use weekly as means to kind of clear my head, get out, and so on.
Well, I coach cross country and track for high school down the street, and my assistant coach drives for Uber and Lyft, and he says the same thing. He says the people that he gets to meet, and he's always talking to me about something that he's picked up, and that they ask the same questions, and that he feels the same way that you do. Literally, it's like it's the same thing. He's got a lot of experience growing up, and he helps people out and stuff too. So I think it's a great way to get to know people and to share some of your wisdom. You mentioned that you wrote a first book. Is that Quiet Lessons?
Yeah, the quiet lessons of an incredibly loud adventure. And
So you've got volume one. So I imagine that you're probably looking at volume two.
once we get a little more life in there, we'll kick the volume 2 out. But, ultimately, a lot of people, they were like, "Oh, you should put this information out. You should write a book and tell the story." And so that's what that book was. It was a place for me to really tell my story. And it honestly was very therapeutic because I was able to revisit aspects of my life that I had kind of closed off as like a observer instead of a participant. And it was healing. And I've came to learn that other people have found the book useful for them as well.
It seems like this is exactly where life-changing challengers come in. Is it's basically, these conversations that you wrote it in the book, these quiet lessons. And this is exactly what this is all about, is that you giving up little nuggets of information. And everybody that I've interviewed and that has been on the show, they've got something, right? There is one lesson in there. For you, it's this hustle and drive that you've always had to keep finding the next thing to. And you being on the rig, promoting and doing music. What do we call that? Several streams of income, right? Separate streams of income, which is fantastic. Same thing when you were a kid. So I think that's definitely something I want to read it. So I'm planning on it. But that's exactly what this podcast is all about. All these people giving these little nuggets of information, just like you were giving your riders. This is a little bit here and there. Here, this is how you get a t-shirt company going up. This you can help out getting on online business, blah, blah, blah. You're giving out little nuggets. And that's exactly what I want everybody to take away from the podcast, is that people like you that have the experience. And if you just give one little piece of advice, one little piece of information, and someone's able to take something away from it that would further their life, get them to their potential, then we've done our job. We're successful, right? Mm-hmm. It's just one. It just needs to be one. So what you've said so far is more than enough. But what I'd like the couple questions that come to mind is, one, stepping back into the times when you were promoting, what did you like better? Did you like being on the promoting side, or did you like actually being on stage better, or does it matter?
I love performing, but I love the mechanical aspect of building something. I was able to create a universe. Performing was one component, but I also love creating the flyer. I love booking the show. I love going out in the streets and promoting it physically. I've came to understand that I like to bird's eye view, come up with an idea, and then I like to mechanically put the pieces together and then watch it. And that's, that was the beginning stages of me doing that. I enjoy being involved in the creation of the whole thing and then putting the pieces together.
I love that too. I'm the same way. So, because I build plans for people. So I'm an endurance coach, as you could see, and I help people get through, marathons, and I coach them through triathlon and ultra marathons and the whole bit. And it's a building of a plan. It's like sitting there and going, okay, hey, well, what's your goal? What do you want to do? And now we've got breakpoints. We got to find the right avenue for you to get you there. And everybody's different. So when I build the plan out, I've got to know strengths and weaknesses and lifestyle circumstances, so that I can make sure that every workout that they do is they're getting everything that they need to get out of it in order to get to a certain break point. And then when we hit that break point, we look for another milestone and then another milestone till we finally get to the race and they can hit their goal at the race. Same thing, creating this plan and then getting them to the finish line. So I get it. I love it. And I'm with you on that. So you're driving for Lyft It's 2020 and you're obviously, were you doing just Lyft? Were you doing like Uber Eats too?
It was never really about the money. So I wasn't trying to do as much as possible. it became about the experience and the process more. So, and so like I kind of always stuck with it. I thought about doing Uber at one point and I just didn't like the app in terms of like the actual like piece of technology. I didn't like it. It was at New Lyft. And so I just did that. And yeah, I did Lyft for a long, I still do Lyft now, but I did Lyft for a while. Then the bars ended up opening back up and I came back. I kind of left as like the bar back, even though before I left, I got sober, but even the years building up, I kind of was the general manager because the general manager was like a major drug addict and was drunk all the time. It was a huge problem. He had been in the industry for a long time. He hadn't found his way to straighten out. So when I came back to the nightclub space after COVID, the owner of the company, at the time, he owned 5 nightclubs, 2 of them being the biggest in the state. And at a point, he kind of offered the general manager for the whole company to me. And so I went from being essentially a bar back that was basically running the show behind the scenes to the general manager of a multi-unit nightclub company conglomerate. And you know, that posed new challenges and new opportunity. I still drove for Lyft the whole time, but I started learning about being not just a manager of one building or one team, but managing multiple teams. I use like a movie metaphor to kind of quickly describe my careers at large. Like when I was trying to be a rapper, I kind of wanted to be in the movies, you know, I wanted to be like in it. And then as time went on, I wanted to be the star of the movie, right? And then after a while, I kind of wanted to just to throw movies, make my own movie. And that's what the promoting shows and that part of it. And then eventually I wanted to like executive produce multiple things at one time. And so when I took that role at the club, I became the guy that was in charge of the kind of linen that we were getting all the way down to the type of marketing strategies that we were using to the, you know, a good portion of the programming fell to me as well. Like a lot of the programming, because it's a big company, we work with Live Nation and other companies, but I still probably programmed at a couple of the bars, like 80-90% of the programming was me. And then at a couple of them, I didn't touch. And then a couple, I probably did like 10 or 15%. But I mean, I'm in control of the whole thing, the way the venue smelled, all of it. And at that juncture of my life, I was kind of trying to be an executive producer, essentially, right? If we're still using the movie medic. Yeah. That now, I worked with that company all the way until October of this year. And at that time, the owner sold 2 of the venues, right? Mm-hmm. To this company called Insomniac, which is like one of the biggest club companies, whatever. Insomniac had kind of offered to bring me on, you know, same salary, probably different role. They kind of sat me down and said, look, whatever you want to do, like, we'll get behind you. We're doing it. Like, we understand your value. We want you there. But, you know, I was looking for a way out of the bar industry. I still understand how important it is to create a space for people to celebrate the highs and lows of their lives. But I just couldn't sit in another meeting where the idea was, how do we get the kids to drink more liquor, right? I had came to recognize for me that, you know, that's not the best thing. Like there's other things. And I understand at certain points in your life, you're going to pursue those things. And I get it. But for me, my goal for the day, it could no longer be, we need this bar to sell this much liquor. And so I needed to find something else. I had the authority to kind of do whatever I wanted, right? And so I started playing with it a little bit. I was playing with life. One of the first things I did was one of the bars I ran was this goth bar. It's a very popular goth club called Milk Bar in Denver. And I had this idea of getting a claw machine and putting it in the lobby of Milk Bar, right? But instead of stocking the claw machine with, you know, the usual suspects of like either stuffed animals or cool suits, whatever, I started going to either vintage toy stores and getting like a Blondie toy or an NC Hammer toy and throwing it in there. Yes. To this goth staple, which is called Fashion Nation. It's been here for a very long time. And I would get like purses that were shaped like coffins, and I would get like crazy goth masks and bags and different things. And I stocked this claw machine with, it was just really fun. I would watch people play it and it would, I made money. It made a lot of money for me, but more than that, it was fun having the ability to play with that idea and have it be successful.
Well, it was your target market. That is the case study for target marketing. It was a golf bar. You got coffin shaped this, and you got like dark eyeshadow probably in there somewhere, and you had maybe a T-shirt rolled up that was a golf thing or whatever. Now, no, because now you're not looking at kids, and what it's usually used for is to get the kid busy while mom and dad pay the bill. This was because you're catering to adults, and this was their thing. That is the case study for target marketing.
And so
It's awesome.
at that same time, literally at the same time, it's funny. Hot dogs were kind of having a year, right? They were getting popular,
Right.
and so I went and bought a box truck, like a vintage box truck, and I had like a dope patina, and I made it into a hot dog food truck, right? But the essence of it wasn't just a hot dog food truck. I named the hot dog food truck Hot Dog Hank, and the character, because at the time the word glizzy was getting popular.
Right.
Everybody talking about eating glizzies and all things, like right when that was really starting to pop. So I created a Hot Dog Hank, and I made him. I put a Gucci hat on him and some gold chains, and it was this whole character. And a food truck, and I parked it literally at the door of the club. So in the back of the club, in the lobby, I got a claw machine with all this cool goth stuff and vintage stuff, and then in the front, I got this hip hop themed hot dog truck that and it was killing it. I was having a blast, and it was making money, and I started having fun. And that was like right out of COVID. And so we did that for a while, and I got bored, and I sold the claw machine. It did what I needed. It gave me the information I needed, and I wanted to move on. And same thing with the food truck. I got the information I needed. Someone else had some interest, and so I ended up selling the food truck and started working on some other concepts. And so another piece I didn't say was during COVID, when I first started driving for Lyft, I ended up managing my local neighborhood ice cream shop. And again, it's just because I need to stay busy. Like I got to keep moving. I hate standing still. And so I managed this ice cream shop for this person, and I enjoyed it. It was like bartending kind of, but they come in, they pick their ice cream, you tell a couple jokes, and then you give them the thing, and it's fun, it's innocent and cool. That stayed in the back of my mind. I enjoyed it. And so, I'm managing all these clubs. I had just sold my hot dog truck and my claw machine. And now people are seeing the success that I'm having, and they're starting, like, food truck guys and restaurant people and other bars are hitting me up and asking me to help with them. And so I started doing consultative work. I start going into, there's one consulting gig I did. It was a high-end lounge, and it held like 120 people was the capacity, but they only had 45 seats for customers, and they were struggling to make the revenue they felt like they could make. And so I went in there and I assessed, well, this is what's going on with your music programming. Let me take that over for you guys. And then I literally told them, I was like, get rid of every stool in here. And the capacity is, you're treating it like a restaurant. You're only letting the 45 people that can be seated in, and then you're saying that you're packed, but you're not, right? The law says that you can have 120 people in here. So let's put 130 people in here and call it capacity, right? And, within a week, they started seeing triple the revenue, right? Their money started working for them. And so I ended up doing another restaurant for them. I did some consultant work for this pizza food truck, things like that. So I'm pursuing other entrepreneurial endeavors. And then, fast forward to maybe a year ago, a local ice cream in a like an iconic neighborhood comes available. And so he wants to move back to Philly, and I end up getting his shop for essentially the cost of the equipment, right? And so I start developing an ice cream business with my wife on the side.
Dang, you know what? When you say hustler, that is a hustler. That is 100% hustler. And you know what I love about it is that you also have a perfect case study for something that I was a Series 7, Series 63 securities broker when I was 19.
Yeah.
And um, we always had the saying, the trend is your friend, right? Everybody talks about, oh, well, you know, it's going to fall or it's going to drop or it's coming down. So it's going to go up. And that's like going against the trend. You go with the trend. And you've got a perfect case study for that. You're like, oh, wait, hot dogs started to get bigger again. Great. Let's get a hot dog stand. And you're like, you know, beat it in the cause. And then like food trucks started to do it. So you got a food truck and you put the hot dogs in it. And then, you know what I mean? I think it just, you got so many great freaking case studies right there that I'm sure that you just went ahead and used in your consulting business and it helped. But you could see the lessons that you are learning as you're telling the story. It's pretty remarkable, my friend. And the idea of these are hustles. Your consulting business, you found that the ability to run an ice cream shop. Now you're owning the ice cream shops. I mean, it's an awesome story, especially from where you came from. The whole story is amazing. So tell me about, when did you decide to write Unleashing the Hustle Within?
Well, so driving for Lyft, I had started to get passionate about helping people. And, you know, all these little hustles were like, it was never really about like, I've always been able to make money. That part was never hard for me. But exploring ideas so that I could then take that piece of information to other people became what was important to me. And so using the hot dog truck or the consulting gig or whatever as a vessel to learn, then I can speak from a place of authority with understanding of how to make that business go. And that's why I'm always dabbling and trying 100 different things, because I want to understand it all. Because when someone's in front of me and they're legitimately at a non-start, they can't figure it out. Like, I love to have a piece of that could spark that curiosity back in them, get them back in the game of finding the success they're looking for.
That's incredible. Yeah. So you just decided to write the book and that was it? Did you do it do you have a certain way?
I wrote the first book and people really enjoyed it. And even though I write books, like one of the executives that worked for the company that I was with for the 12 years, the nightclub company, something that she told me early on, which stuck with me, was she's like, you have this ability of taking something complicated and making it really fucking simple. Sorry, I didn't mean to curse.
No, it's fine.
Making it really simple. I have the ability of taking complex things and making it simple, dumbing it down. And that stuck with me. And that's kind of what I've done at every juncture, right? Like finding solutions. And so I wrote the first book and it seemed to be helpful for people. And I hadn't quite scratched that itch of getting the information out that I wanted to, right? And so I jumped into the next book within maybe a month of the first book coming out. I started working on it. And this book is a little bit more spiritually oriented and hustle oriented, right? It's not even so much about making money. It's about finding the kind of life success that you're looking for. And it's not always related to money. It's just about like, when you go to bed, did you live as full as you could? Did you give it all you got? And when you woke up, were you ready to go? Would you figure it out? And that's what the book's about. And yeah, so I started writing the book almost immediately after the first book. You know, went on a trip and kind of got the bulk of it done and started the process of putting it together and I tried to orient the book in a way that it could hold its own up against some of these other books that are kind of in the same realm.
Right.
Difference being, I come from our background. I've experienced a bunch of life, and I have a passion to work with people to help them find the prosperity life that they're looking for.
And I agree, and I can see it. You know, it's very evident by the way that you speak that that's your goal there. And you know, it's and I know it because like knows like, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's all I wanted to do my whole life is find a way to help people, and to be passionate about it. So, and you are definitely one of those people. So, hey, listen, for all you guys listening out there, this is Tullie Bailey, and he's a guy that from oil and gas to freaking music and promoting to to entrepreneur to Lyft, and now he's got ice cream shops. Who knows what's going to be next, right? But you're gonna have to go on to TullieBailey.com and find out. So he has 2 books out. One is called The Quiet Lessons. The Quiet Lessons of an Incredibly Loud Adventure, Volume 1, and then Unleashing the Hustle Within, Advice for Positive and Productive Life. And I think that's the emphasis right there, was what Tullie just said. Right there is what he said, is that it's not necessarily about making money. It's about having a positive and productive life. And on this podcast, I always talked about that you want every day 1% better. You want to make yourself 1% better. You read 10 pages of a self-help book, you put something into practice, there's your 1%. You got up, you got up and you worked out, that's 1% better. Physical, emotional, spiritual, hit that in relationship. You just 1% better every day, and you'll lead that positive and productive life. But I would definitely read this book, Unleashing the Hustle, and take some of the lessons from Tullie here, because what he's dropped on us today is a boatload of information. But Tullie, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Everything's going to be in the show notes, guys. His website, the 2 books, we're going to have direct links right to the book so you can grab those. And if you're watching on YouTube, you know what? Hit that like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you always know when we're gonna drop another episode. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify or some other podcast-driven website or app, hey, leave a review. And you know what? It doesn't even have to be a good review. It could be any review, whether it could be mediocrity or it could be a bad review, but it gives me feedback for me to go ahead and make Life-Changing Challenges podcast just that much better. But for Tullie Bailey and myself, thank you so much. We will see you in the next one.
Well, that wraps up another episode of Life-Changing Challengers. I'm your host, Brad Minus, saying thank you for joining us on this journey of transformation. If today's stories inspired you, please take a moment to review, share, and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Your support helps us reach more listeners and create an even bigger impact. Remember, every challenge is a chance to grow. Until next time, keep pushing, keep challenging, and never stop pursuing your extraordinary.